Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us on Sunday, September 5th at Global Technopolitics Forum's research team meeting. We have a short meeting. Greg is not with us. He had some emergencies happening in his house. So, Jennifer, would you like to start by telling us about your research this week?
Yes. So I did put it in the file, but I was taking notes on the big tech crackdown by the Chinese government that we discussed and the new regulations that are being used that hint that the mega growth we've seen is coming to an end. And just that the Chinese government is going to try to use these laws as a means of like promoting Communist Party control. They're like banning online celebrity fan clubs. They're passing laws that reduce the amount of times that kids can like play online video games, things like that. And they're saying it's to protect young people. But it's also going to have a major effect on like the massive billionaire growth of tech giants. And it is like vaguely similar to US big tech critic calls for like regulation and that kind of thing on the surface. But they also go like several steps further than any like US law would ever go. The Cyberspace Administration of China released a draft copy of the rules to place limits on AI algorithms as well that big tech uses to rank social media feeds, and that would be the first of any major country to change how social media companies rate content. And the overall like implications for these laws would mean that it would be harder for US companies to stop US and EU authorities from passing tougher regulations here. So these Chinese laws could have international implications. And the overall goal of them is to return power from the tech company to the Chinese Communist Party. And Xi Jinping says that the campaign efforts have been so far successful, and he wants the party to do more. It's already taken $1 trillion off of Chinese tech stocks. And he has said that the goal is to prevent the irrational expansion of capital after the quote barbarous growth in the tech sector. So it really is to like check billionaires and, you know, promote the Chinese communist idea of like group prosperity and everyone's on the relatively same playing field. And they're promoting fair competition. And it's actually had kind of like interesting consequences in terms of the fact that tech billionaires now are trying to get into the favor of the government by doing things like donating so much more money to charity, or like getting on government panels. And for example, tech billionaires in China have given $13 billion the past 8 months compared to 2019, when only one tech guy was on the top 10 list of biggest donors and nowhere near $1 billion. And they're doing this to kind of get into the good graces of the Communist Party.
So a few comments here. If you could put in bullet points that what you think the intentions are. So you mentioned control. So beyond control and control over tech giant, over data, over people. So if you kind of expand on those issues, the other thing I want to know is what would be the impact on innovation, how it's going to impact innovation in China, and also to what extent it's about controlling tech giant, to what extent it's about controlling people. So I want to a bit dig more into it in terms of why, what is happening, how it's going to impact everything. The other comment I have, Jennifer, is your papers. If you please make sure on the title where you put the folder, the file, you put your name and date. None of them has date or name, you know? So that's right now, you know where you put something, but in later dates, we don't know who is written this article or this report. So you need really to be more organized in that sense. Okay, so any comment in terms of those bullet points I mentioned? Jennifer, did we lose you?
No, sorry. I was accidentally muted. So I will compile all of the goals into a more like clear and concise section next week, and also like further research to figure out like what the implications are in terms of innovation, and we'll have that.
And also understand what is happening. And you heard me in terms of labeling your
Yeah, the name and date. I got it.
Yeah, do that.
Right.
Okay. Any comment, Paul?
No, I mean, I think it's a good summary. My only comment or thought would be, where does social unrest fit into this as a calculation or motivation? And then it seems to me that focus tends to be a lot on the tech sector, but there are plenty of other industries and sectors in China where there are some very wealthy people who are as wealthy, if not more wealthy, than some of the tech people. So where do they fit in? What's going on there, and how do we factor in the conditions of some of these other sectors?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So look into where this might be impacting non-tech billionaires.
Yeah, and I think
if at all. I mean,
yeah,
it's not clear to me that they are. I mean, this is sort of, a lot of this to me seems sort of for show, and that when you start to peel back the onion, you realize that there isn't really as much substantive change as you might imagine or think if you just look at the headlines. And I also wonder how much of this is reaction to concerns about growing social unrest. I mean, that's the whole issue of the common prosperity message, is that, there's growing divisions, or which has been going on for a long time in China, between the people who are getting wealthy and living in big cities and the people in the countryside. I mean, sort of like in the US to some extent, but on a grander scale. And that, as Chinese government leaders know from their own history, is a seeds for disaster if it goes too far. So I'm wondering, sort of where that fits into the calculations, as I say. And then maybe behind all that, there's the issue of unemployment or unemployment. I think that China is heading towards a labor shortage. So we tend to focus on the data, on the innovation, all this kind of stuff. But what about, what impact does this have on employment opportunities for young people who have been told that they should be gearing up to be involved in the tech sector and innovate? And if these tech companies are being cut down to size, I assume that reduces the number of employment opportunities. So what impact does it have on a young person just graduating from school? How do they think about their future prospects, and how does that square with the actions that the government is taking?
Mm-hmm. I think one thing we should realize when you mentioned that non-tech companies, I think the Chinese government has come with a requirement that there must be a government representative in all boards. So company boards now are obliged to have a government representative. So I think that goes beyond tech sector. But Jennifer, it would be good to look at that as well, that what is and how is impacting. Puran, any comment from you?
Very quick, Puri. I mean, the first thing I would say is that it's very naive to sort of look at what China is doing in terms of putting a lot of control on how much time can young people spend on gaming. And, of course, they're taking this whole, slant of addiction and gaming and stuff like that. But it sort of goes in multiple directions. And I would probably say that while we are dealing with this particular issue or subject, it'll be a good idea to sort of go back and see what are the kind of antitrust laws in China, which has been, a bone of contention, both within private sector and Communist Party of China. And nobody really knows what antitrust laws in China are and how could they really play out when the party is sort of trying to put this kind of control on the private sector, especially tech giants who are making these toys and games. And, so this is the first part. The second part is that, to me, it looks like a new invention by Chinese Communist Party on how could they really, quote unquote, sanction private sector, because sanctions have happened, which have always happened from one country onto another country. But this new way looks to be pretty convoluted as to how can a particular country go against the private sector. Because if private sector in any country around the world, if you really look, the success story is not when a party is doing something, private sector is doing something, all in isolation. Partnerships are very, very important for growth and development of any economy. And Power and Wealth, the book which we were talking about a week back when we met, it also sort of goes on to pinpoint that it'll be very helpful if Chinese party tries to work together or partner with the private sector, because that could be one of the ways to sort of develop and move further economically in a very positive sense. Third thing is, if that happens, which would also mean that there'll be less supply in a way, because if I can't make use of my laptop, why should I buy it? So what really then happens in the shadow? What will these private sector people with the sanctions or the Communist Party of China do in order to rehabilitate oversupply of these guys? Because if there is that kind of a sanction, the people that you can't really look at something of that kind and play the game for more than 1 hour, every a weekday and on holidays, then where do the extra supplies of those gaming gadgets go? So to me, looks that these three things: antitrust law in China, why private sector and communist parties would not work together if they were to really grow, and then what really happens when we have a lot of oversupply of these gadgets, when people will either stop buying less or might. And then the final thing would be what happens to the young people. How do they really spend the time? So I think, this is a broader framework within which I would really like to sort of locate this particular problem, which is really going to accentuate between private sector and the Chinese Communist Party, and be interesting to watch out what happens.
Yeah, we're writing a broad proposal in China, so just one component Jennifer is working on, but it's good to, because there's so many interactions, and it's good to identify. So Jennifer, it would be good if you bullet point these things. Of course, you can't study all of that, but the extent you could study the points you identify, and as I said, within broader study, these interactions are good to look at and see which ones are valid, which ones are happening, which ones are not noticeable, and to look at it. The work between, of course, Chinese party and private sector is well documented, but it's good to look at it as well. Any comment from you, Jennifer? I think I interrupted you. Any comment from you, Jennifer? Or maybe we'll.
No, I'm good. I was just listening.
Okay.
Yeah, no comments.
Or Paul, any comments?
Yeah, no, just sort of an idle comment. I mean, not perhaps related to anything that anyone's looking at, but this whole issue of restricting young people's access and video gaming time. I sort of wondered as I heard that, how do you actually operationalize that? I mean, how can you actually manage to pull that off when you have millions of people, young people, and there are plenty of, as far as I can see, loopholes to getting around that? It's very simple. So yeah, I mean, I haven't looked too carefully or heard much about it, but how do you actually go ahead and do that? It's not too clear to me.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they would do it. I haven't researched it, but I think that governments, usually they start from one point and then they figure out the rest. So perhaps they're going to start from this point of view, and then they start to figure out, and of course, people are going to figure out how to break the rules and regulations. So that's what I have seen over the last 20 years, the way it plays out, and it's constant. the, cat and mouse game of, closing one door and people open another one and new software comes and something else. Have you seen anything, Jennifer, in terms of how they're going to implement this?
No, all the research I did is up there. I haven't like looked into that yet.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the implementation will be an issue, but I'm sure they will find ways that, like everything else.
Well, maybe this ties into the subject once again about how much is actually solid, tangible stuff, and how much is just headlines, right? Sending a signal, but it's not really anything that when you start to look more carefully, you realize that actually there isn't so much change or action or, going on. It's a lot of, public relations and communications, but nothing much more than that. I mean, I'm belittling this or making it sound a little bit, but anyway, I just sort of, it's an interesting thing. How do you actually operationalize something like this? Yeah.
I'm sure China doesn't want to hurt its innovation, sort of space. Having said that, I think for Xi, control is number one. So I think control really sits at the heart of it, both controlling tech giants and controlling general public. So while I'm sure there is messages to general public, I think at the same time, element of control stays there. They want to control the data. They want to control power over the public. So, but yeah, more research would be good. So since we don't have other students here and most of our white papers are towards the end, so the good news is Eduardo, who will be joining us from, I think, next week or week after, now got a proposal for publishing his book with Oxford University, which Greg put him in touch. So he will give us some sort of presentation over the next few weeks. And beyond that, I think that's basically it. Is there any other comments from anybody? No? So on that note, I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.